So I'm gonna take a little bit privilege of being the moderator to start the first question before we have different age group to come and ask more questions or share your thoughts on this talk today. I want to see, I'm below the younger crowd, so I'm going to ask something the younger people struggle. And we have this phrase in Taiwan, talk about bread and love. And it's constantly for young people nowadays thinking about, we want to have bread before we have love, which is different. When we see in the soap opera, love first and then bread. So I want to just kind of see how you think about this bread and love balance and bread and love struggle among the young people, and how do you have some advice for the younger generation how to come along and tackle this issue?
Well, so I can add to being English and male to being old as well. So I don't really have my kind of whether or not I'm qualified to say about this, but I think that so. As demographers, we do tend to forget that a lot of this is determined by human emotion, is by love. We're not very good at measuring love. And I know that Guy at the back is a demographer, and he's going to be very embarrassed that I'm going to start talking about love now. But when we do all these surveys about fertility preferences, fertility intentions, what would you say you'd like to do? Of course, this is based on a very rational model, right? Very rational economic view of looking at the world. But of course, that changes when you fall in love. It also changes when you fall out of love as well, right? Things can happen. So there's very little that the government can do and that the private sector can do about love, right? That's just... And I don't think we should be doing anything about that. I don't think we should be getting in the way of love when it occurs, to refer to what's happened in the last couple of weeks here in Taiwan. So love is will be an individual issue, an individual choice, and there's very little that would be done to change that. But about bread, that's when we can do something. That's when the public sector and the private sector can work together and think, is this the future that we want in terms of the future of work, the future of the labour force, right? In Britain, we have something called 0-hour contracts. I don't know whether you have that here, which is that you basically you have a job and you are contracted to work no hours, 0. But then on Monday morning or Sunday night, you'll get an email or a text on your phone to say, right, we want you to work from 9 till 12 on Wednesday and then 3 till 7 on Friday or whatever, And that's a 0-hour contract. So this is what we call this fragile work. Now, at some point, so in terms of bread to support your love, that's very difficult, right? How you can use that kind of instability, that fragility at work to support your love is almost impossible. So I think that we can... As the public and the private sector, we can do a lot more on the bread side, yeah? But we don't just think of bread in terms of money, but in terms of broader systems of support. But then to go back to love as well, although falling in love is one thing, but if you're in love, I can't believe I'm a demographer talking like this as well. These two demographers here as well are going to be very embarrassed about this. But, sometimes you could say, well, loving can be about sharing as well. And if you're in the quotes that I've given there, that clearly there's something going on in that couple that might that the government can't do something about, but the man can do something about, to observe that maybe this situation is, maybe I might be being a little bit selfish, maybe the circumstances are not quite right, maybe my wife, my partner could be happy if I change my behaviour a little bit. Now, part of that could be to do with work, you can blame work and you can say, well, no, I have to stay at work until very late, so when I come home I can't do any childcare, so that's a work issue. But then at some point maybe you've got to stand up and say, well, maybe I've got to make a change myself. Right, so I think that it's a useful way to think of these different approaches into it. Yeah.
That's very important of the research you have done in Taiwan to actually highlight some of the individual micro level of the struggle of a family. And then you just propose that we should also, while we can intervene people's love affairs, but we can create a culture of understanding, sharing family, the risk of starting a family, the complexity, the work bearing of actually taking care of the family. So I think that's a very important research that highlights some of the problem. And I want to bring my question to a more macro level. And I think we talk about the micro and then the macro, maybe even the meso level, how that individual preferences and connect to the institution level. One thing you mentioned, in the talk today about how important it is in the information. Do you feel that currently the information that we have on the population trajectories or our concerns is accurate based on what we know, what we learned today? And is there any way the government should actually to pay more attention on, to prioritize? You keep on mentioning action today, because population is a type of problem that's irreversible. Whatever you do today, it would really set up what's happening in the future, or what is currently happening in our population composition. It's what happened in the past, and we can't really change that right away. So could you give us some pointer and highlight some of the crucial priority that we should act now?
Yeah, I think in terms of the measures, to start, because there's two things. The first, in terms of the measures, that sometimes our measures are not very helpful. When we, for example, I talk about how we measure aging, right? We talk about the number of people aged over 65 relative to the number of people aged 20 to 64. This is a crazy way to measure aging, because it assumes that there's something that happens when you turn 65. It assumes that everyone aged over 65 is dependent. It assumes that everybody who's aged 20 to 64 is working, is in the labour force, which of course is not the case either. So we need to have, I think, a better view of actually defining what the problem actually is and whether or not it is a problem. And maybe as demographers, we need to take a step back completely and say, well, look, if we're worried about pensions, then we've got to measure purely within the pension system. We have to measure what goes in, what comes out, what the actuarial forecasts are for the future, and then that's it. The other problem, I think, is that far too much of this policy narrative has been left to people who do quantitative work like myself. Then actually what we need to do is, if we want to try to find on an individual level what people want, we need to talk to people. And this isn't going to be just some harmonized questionnaire that we run all over the world, right? Although that helps. We need to have individual conversations to find out what's going on in people's lives, right? And until we do that, the policies that we develop may not be, or probably not going to be, aligned to particular needs and particular viewpoints. In terms of actions, it's difficult to know where to start, right? Because if you see that rather than being the problem itself, it's a downstream problem, or downstream effect of lots of other problems, then it's, as I say, it's hard to know where to start. But to take an obvious example, we know the impact upon having children for women's work, and so we need to have I think improved policies around family-friendly workplaces. But then again, it's important to realise that not everybody works in a corporation, right? They will need support for SMEs, for small medium enterprises as well, which is actually the majority of people are going to be working in such enterprise, and for the self-employed. So there'll be kind of policies needed for that particular area. I'm being told to shut up, so I'll
All right. I start to see people have, the face of want to ask questions. And because we have a lot of people in the audience today, so I'm going to go around the room. And please keep your questions within 1 minute so that we can allow more people to ask the question. So I'm opening the floor. Yes, we have the first.
In the beginning, you said you're going to talk about immigration a little bit later, so I want you to talk about that.
Would you like to address briefly?
Yeah, that was what I wrote that down. If I didn't get the poster here, that's exactly what I was going to say, right? So it's okay, yeah, it's all right. So I would argue, so immigration in and of itself is neither a good thing or a bad thing. It's just another demographic process, right? you will not fix population aging through immigration. It's not possible. Because just the raw numbers of people you would have to be getting in year after year after year, because of course immigrants get old as well, right? So in order to maintain this support ratio, to maintain the number of people aged one age to another age, you would need to have an enormous number of people. Literally hundreds of millions of people would have to move to Taiwan to keep that support ratio the same. Now, that's not to say, of course, that migration can't play an important role in this. There will be, in certain sectors, for example, elderly care, right, is without a doubt going to be something which grows tremendously around the world. Everyone's got this faith, oh no, we'll all be looked after by robots and stuff. I don't believe it, right? We'll still need people to help us. It's not a job that people want to do, okay? So that will be an area where migration will play a role. Now, in the long term, again, you see, migration becomes an immediate solution to this. But then you could say, but then why is it a job that nobody wants to do? Why don't we try to make it a job that people want to do? Why don't we professionalize it? You know, put diplomas, you know, so you can get proper diplomas and proper training around this. Okay. So it's sometimes seen as a kind of cheap solution to a big problem that we have internally. Other skill sectors, other skill gaps certainly exist, which migration itself can solve, can work on. In terms of love, people fall in love with people from other countries, you know, and that's a migration issue as well. Yeah. So migration is just is a tool that feeds into this, but it's not the solution. It on a demographic level is just simply not the solution.
All right, Professor.
Well, I'm getting older and older, so I'm real worried about the future of Taiwan. And sitting next to me is the representative of the Swiss office, and he just told me that 25% of the Swiss population today are immigrants. So why isn't immigration a solution to the problem? In other words, do you think that Taiwan should adopt a more aggressive, active migration policy?
So Switzerland, so European countries, migration in Switzerland is a different context to migration in Taiwan, right? In terms of the regulatory framework, right? In terms of when it comes about if you say about immigration, you say, right, what do we want to achieve? Okay. Let's say, what's the population of Taiwan now? It's like 20-something million, 23 million, right? If we say, okay, I want to keep the population at 23 million, well then you've got to have through immigration, yeah? You might be able to increase the fertility rate to keep people, about people having a few more children, but the way to keep the population constant would be through immigration, right? But then you might say, but then what's the point of keeping the population 25 million? Why does the population need to be 23, 24 million? Yeah? Would it not be just as okay? Would it not be just as acceptable to have a population of 20 million, which is older, but is also more highly educated, more productive, is healthier? You know, why would you need to have all of these people just for the sake of having them? You know, similarly with, as I said, and that's the point about the ratio between the young and the old. You know, okay, so you could say, well, it's not just about having 24 million, but we need to just keep bringing in people aged 20 to 25 or 20 to 30. But then what happens when they turn 31 or 41 or 51 or 61? How do you manage that as well? Yeah, so immigration has very powerful effects on particular subsectors, but it's until we actually define what we're worried about, what the problem is. You know, otherwise we end up dealing with this in kind of, dare I say it, kind of biblical terms. You know, that our population defines us. Yeah, that a country with 50 million people is stronger than a country with 25 million people, or a country with 1.3 billion people over the water is 20 times strong. Well, that doesn't work like that. You know, it doesn't need to be like that at all.
Good. We have question. Maybe I move over there. We have, go around the circles. Yeah. Yes. We have one. Yes.
I heard press reports that press reports have been that chemicals in the environment, specifically pesticides, affect physical fertility, specifically male fertility. Is this a factor, do you think?
There's, without a doubt, we know that there are studies. Actually, I remove that without a doubt now. There are studies, particularly in Denmark, which shows that male fertility is lower and can be affected. And of course, it's an important issue in particular relation, on the micro level, right? As female fertility, as female, female age of childbearing, I wasn't expecting a question on this. As the female age of childbearing goes up and up and up, then obviously there will be more and more issues around the ability to conceive. And it is, again, through a kind of a sexist viewpoint, which is what it is that women tend to be the one who get the blame, right? Women are the one who says, oh, well, you're too old, you're having children too late, of course. And actually, in terms of both the difficulties of conceiving and also any kind of problems that result of later childbearing, is just as likely to be male rather than female. So I think that's an issue. But that's really on the individual level. I think there was some studies done in France which says, look, if everybody who wanted to conceive at older ages was given all of the support in order to conceive, then the impact on the fertility rate would be very, very, very small. It will be very, very, very small because it's still at this older age. But that's not to say that we shouldn't do it, because that's individual aspirations and individual choices. In terms of a kind of society-wide sub-fecundity, as we would say. Sorry, that's a nice word. Don't get to say that very often in a big audience. One argument to say that if you're male with lower male fertility is that you just need to try to have sex more often. I can't believe I'm talking about this now. So there is one. That's one way round it. But I'm just going to stop.
All right. I saw some hand. We have yes, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Hi. Okay. I actually have one feedback and one question. The first one is even though we want to boost fertility rate, but actually I think not every woman is encouraged. For example, women with hereditary disease, women with mental issues, or murder or something. So it seems like we are encouraging certain types of women to have children, and it's I think it's my observation. And the second question is even you say think indirectly. Sorry, I'm super nervous. And so I'm thinking that, do you think that universal basic income could be a solution to it?
There's no need to be nervous at all, because those are two really good questions. I think that there's the history of family policy, the history of family planning is linked to the history of eugenics as well, and is linked to having the right people having fewer children, or the wrong people having fewer children and the right people having more children. In Singapore, I really hope this, there are going to be people in Singapore watching this, but in Singapore, much more recently than you might consider, the difference between, well, if you're a woman with a degree, we'll support you, you have more kids. If you're not, then that's going to be a different issue as well. So we have to be very, very careful about this. My own personal view is that if we take this rights-based approach, then it doesn't matter who you are. If you want to have, and please don't think that I'm saying that some people should be encouraged more than others. That's absolutely opposite of what I would say. That everybody should be able to realize their aspirations, and if that's to have no children, then that's your business, and nobody should put any pressure on you to do any otherwise. Now, when we move into, there's a point, I think, later when we talk about other different groups, we move into ethical areas, and that's not really for me to get involved with. But those, if we would just talk about the general population, then we would say that, you know, it's just about whatever your aspirations, what you want to achieve. In terms of universal basic income, well, the link between universal basic income and fertility preferences or fertility plan has not been done yet because it's so new. You know, we've only had a few experiments in a few places, and we don't really know what's going to happen in those. My suspicion would be that it would support fertility. Because you've got, well, you have a basic income, you have a safety net, which if everything else goes wrong, you know that you're still going to have some basic, as you say, well, a basic income. So I think that it would be done. But again, I wouldn't necessarily bring in universal basic income to increase the fertility rate. I bring in universal basic income because it's a good idea and it actually has positive implications, so as the studies would suggest, have positive implications for other areas of individual self-worth, the economy, of labour force participation, and maybe it will increase fertility. But anyway, I'm going to put that on one of my slides. That's very nice, actually. I like that idea. Right. That's really good.
Our young people are really thinking, well, about their future.